Hollywood's golden age glittered on the surface, but beneath the studio lights, a ruthless war was being waged between the most powerful actresses in the world and the press that wanted to destroy them. Cameras clicked in darkened alleyways, reporters bribed hotel staff, gossip columnists held careers hostage. The women who dominated the silver screen from the 1930s through the 1960s were hunted, exposed, manipulated, and publicly shamed, not for crimes, but simply for daring to live outside the rigid moral cage that society had built around them. These are the stories Hollywood buried, the scandals the studios tried to erase, and the moments that defined an era of ruthless celebrity destruction. Buckle up, because none of this was pretty. 1. Marlene Dietrich, the gender-bending icon they couldn't silence. Marlene Dietrich was perhaps the most provocatively photographed woman in Hollywood history, and the press made absolutely certain the public never forgot it. Born in Berlin in 1901, Dietrich arrived in Hollywood with a reputation that preceded her like a thunderstorm. The press caught her repeatedly appearing in public, wearing men's trousers, tailored suits, and top hats, a direct violation of social norms in an era when cross-dressing in public was literally illegal in many American cities. Photographers stalked her outside the Paramount lot, capturing images that editors salivated over. What made the situation genuinely explosive was that Dietrich never apologized, never retreated, and never once pretended to conform. The real controversy deepened when press correspondents began reporting on her openly complicated personal life. She maintained a decades-long open arrangement with her husband, Rudolf Sieber, while simultaneously cultivating intimate relationships with both men and women, including, reportedly, Greta Garbo, Edith Piaf, and several major Hollywood leading men. Gossip queen Hedda Hopper dedicated entire columns to dismantling Dietrich's reputation, calling her morally dangerous and culturally subversive. During World War II, photographs emerged of Dietrich entertaining troops in ways that the conservative press found scandalous, kissing soldiers on the mouth, performing in barely their costumes while generals watched. The studio attempted to manage her image frantically, but Dietrich operated entirely on her own terms. She was fined, blacklisted from certain venues, and publicly condemned. Yet she outlasted every single columnist who tried to destroy her. Dietrich's story is the ultimate tale of a woman who refused to be captured by anyone's camera, but on her own terms. 2. Lana Turner, the sweater girl and the scandal that shook a nation. Lana Turner's life reads like the most sensational Hollywood noir script ever written, and the press was there for every devastating chapter. Discovered supposedly while sipping a soda at a drugstore on Sunset Boulevard, Turner was immediately branded by the press as the ultimate symbol of dangerous female sexuality. The so-called sweater girl, whose publicity images caused moral outrage across church groups and parent associations throughout the 1940s. But the press truly bared its teeth in 1958 when Turner's teenage daughter, Cheryl Crane, stabbed Turner's abusive boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, to death inside their Beverly Hills home. The photographs taken outside that home, Turner being escorted out by police, her mascara destroyed, wearing a housecoat in front of a dozen flashbulbs, became some of the most reproduced images in entertainment history. The press did not treat this as a tragedy. They treated it as confirmation of everything they had always said about Lana Turner being a woman of reckless, dangerous character. Reporters dug through every aspect of Turner's romantic history: her 8 marriages, her documented relationships with underworld-connected figures, her well-known struggles with substance use. Gossip columns printed Stampanato's love letters to Turner without her consent, exposing her most private communications to millions of readers. It was an invasion of privacy so severe it would be considered criminal harassment by modern standards. The coroner ruled the killing justifiable homicide, but the press never truly cleared Lana Turner's name, preferring instead to keep her permanently positioned as Hollywood's most gloriously fallen woman. 3. Rita Hayworth, the pinup. They dismantled piece by piece. Rita Hayworth was literally plastered on an atomic bomb. A photograph of her was attached to the nuclear device detonated at Bikini Atoll in 1946. And even that wasn't the most disturbing thing the press did with her image. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino to a Spanish dancer father, Hayworth was subjected to painful electrolysis on her hairline and forced to dye her naturally dark hair auburn, so she would appear less ethnically foreign to American audiences. The press both celebrated and weaponized this transformation. When Hayworth married Prince Ali Khan in 1949, international press coverage turned vicious. She was portrayed as a gold-digging social climber who had trapped a royal, with photographers following her across the French Riviera, snapping her in swimsuits, catching moments of private argument between her and Khan that were then described in lurid detail in newspapers worldwide. The coverage had a deeply racial undercurrent. Journalists fixated on Khan's Muslim faith and Indian heritage in ways that exposed the profound bigotry embedded in Hollywood press culture. Hayworth's later years brought even more devastating press intrusion. As she began showing signs of what would eventually be diagnosed as Alzheimer's disease, reporters described her public confusion and memory lapses as evidence of substance abuse or mental instability. She was photographed in states of genuine medical vulnerability, and those images were published without context or compassion. Rita Hayworth's story is ultimately one of a woman whose image was owned by everyone except herself, exploited in life and in death by an industry that never truly saw her as a human being. 4. Ava Gardner, the barefoot Contessa who terrified the studios. Ava Gardner was everything the Hollywood establishment feared in a woman: unapologetically sensual, fiercely independent, openly contemptuous of the studio system, and absolutely impossible to control. Born in rural North Carolina, Gardner rose to international stardom while simultaneously becoming the most consistently controversial figure in the gossip press throughout the late 1940s and 1950s. Photographers caught her dancing barefoot in Spanish streets at 3 a.m. Reporters documented her stormy, publicly explosive relationship with Frank Sinatra, including the infamous incident where neighbors called police during one of their legendary arguments in Palm Springs. The press was particularly brutal about Gardner's relationship with bullfighters, flamenco dancers, and other figures considered socially beneath her Hollywood status. When she relocated to Spain in the mid-1950s, American tabloids portrayed it as a moral exile, a fallen woman retreating from respectable society. Spanish newspapers treated her as a goddess, which only infuriated the American press further. What makes Gardner's case especially compelling is how MGM's publicity machine worked in direct opposition to the press narrative. The studio tried relentlessly to position her as a sophisticated, controlled star, while reporters simultaneously published accounts of her wild evenings, her sharp tongue, and her absolute refusal to pretend she was something she wasn't. Gardner herself once famously said she had lived her life and wasn't going to apologize for any of it, a statement that was itself treated as scandalous proof of her moral defectiveness. She was photographed in compromising social situations constantly, and each image was used as another brick in the wall the press built around her reputation. 5. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed storm they couldn't contain. No actress in Hollywood history generated more genuinely explosive press controversy than Elizabeth Taylor, and the cameras that followed her throughout the 1950s and 1960s captured moments that permanently redefined what celebrity scandal could mean. Taylor was first thrust into controversy before she was even 20 years old, when the press began obsessively documenting her romantic life with a level of detail that today would be recognized as deeply inappropriate, given her age. The nuclear detonation of Taylor's press story arrived in 1958, when her husband, Mike Todd, died in a plane crash, and she subsequently began a relationship with singer Eddie Fisher, who was married to America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds. The photographs of Taylor and Fisher together while Reynolds was still publicly grieving the end of her marriage became the defining images of celebrity moral outrage for an entire decade. Taylor was called a homewrecker in headlines across the world, received death threats, and was condemned from church pulpits. Then came Cleopatra, filmed in Rome between 1961 and 1963, during which Taylor's relationship with Richard Burton, himself married, became the most photographed and reported romance in human history up to that point. Paparazzi rented boats to photograph them on yachts. Telephoto lenses captured private moments on film sets. The Vatican publicly condemned Taylor by name. Italian newspapers ran daily front-page coverage. What the press framed as moral outrage was in reality an unprecedented invasion of privacy against a woman whose only offense was conducting a romantic relationship outside the boundaries society had prescribed for her. 6. Marilyn Monroe, the image that consumed the woman. Marilyn Monroe's relationship with the press was perhaps the most psychologically devastating documented case of celebrity exploitation in the 20th century. From her earliest days as Norma Jean Baker, Monroe was photographed, manipulated, repackaged, and sold as a product, and the press participated enthusiastically in erasing the actual human being behind the carefully constructed image. In 1952, a story broke that Monroe had posed for nude calendar photographs before her stardom. Rather than destroying her career as the studio feared, the press coverage and Monroe's own brilliantly handled response turned it into a sensation. But the episode revealed something sinister. The press had been sitting on the story, using it as leverage. This was standard practice in an era when gossip columnists operated as virtual blackmailers, trading silence for access and cooperation. The monitoring of Monroe's personal life became genuinely predatory. Photographers were bribed to follow her to psychiatrist appointments. Her documented mental health struggles were reported as character flaws rather than medical realities. Her marriages to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller were dissected with a cruelty that neither man faced in remotely equivalent terms. When DiMaggio's possessive behavior contributed to their divorce, headlines blamed Monroe. When her marriage to Miller deteriorated under the pressure of her health struggles, she was portrayed as the destructive force. The photographs taken of Monroe in the final years of her life, showing her visibly unwell on film sets, being escorted to and from medical facilities, were published without any ethical consideration for what they revealed about her suffering. Monroe's story remains the most powerful indictment of how the press of this era treated women as spectacle rather than as people. 7. Joan Crawford, the Iron Lady the columnists loved to crucify. Joan Crawford survived 4 decades in Hollywood through sheer titanium-reinforced determination, and the press resented her survival with remarkable consistency. Crawford began her career in the late silent film era and reinvented herself so many times that columnists ran out of ways to explain her continued relevance, so they attacked her character instead. The most notorious press assault on Crawford came not during her lifetime but after her death, when her adopted daughter, Christina Crawford, published her memoir in 1978. But throughout Crawford's active career, the press had been steadily constructing a narrative of coldness, manipulation, and ruthless ambition. Photographs caught Crawford arriving at events in immaculate designer clothing while simultaneously running a household and raising children. And somehow both facts were used against her. She was either too focused on image or not focused enough on motherhood. Crawford's romantic history, 4 marriages, numerous well-documented relationships, and her early career in pre-code Hollywood, where she appeared in films that would be considered explicit by the standards of the following decades, was used as a continuous weapon. When her career declined in the 1940s, press coverage was gleeful in its cruelty. When she made her extraordinary comeback in Mildred Pierce in 1945, winning the Academy Award, the press almost seemed annoyed by her resilience. Most damaging was the documented animosity between Crawford and Bette Davis, which the press cultivated and amplified for decades. What were likely genuine professional tensions became, in press hands, a legendary blood feud that defined both women's careers in ways neither of them could entirely control. 8. Bette Davis, the actress who fought back and paid the price. Bette Davis was the rare Hollywood actress who attempted to legally fight the studio system, and the press treated her rebellion as evidence of a dangerous, ungovernable personality. In 1936, Davis sued Warner Brothers over her contract, a genuinely groundbreaking act of professional self-determination, and lost the case. The press covered her loss with barely concealed satisfaction, portraying Davis as an overreaching woman who had been appropriately put back in her place. Davis's personal life provided the press with abundant material. Her 4 marriages were chronicled with the kind of forensic negativity typically reserved for political scandals. Her documented feud with co-stars, her legendary on-set demands for creative control, and her refusal to perform feminine deference to studio executives were all translated by reporters into evidence of a difficult, unfeminine personality. The physical transformation Davis underwent for various roles, playing aged, unglamorous, or physically unconventional characters, was particularly weaponized by the press. When she deliberately made herself appear haggard for a role, headlines described her real appearance as shocking. When she maintained her physical appearance carefully, she was described as vain and calculating. Davis's longevity in Hollywood was remarkable, but press coverage of her later career was consistently framed around the theme of decline, how far she had fallen, how diminished she was from her peak. The 1962 film Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, in which Davis and Joan Crawford famously appeared together, generated press coverage so focused on their alleged mutual hatred that the film's genuine quality was almost secondary to the scandal the media manufactured around its production. 9. Grace Kelly, the saint they couldn't stop hunting. Grace Kelly represented everything society claimed to want from a woman: beauty, elegance, apparent virtue, and ultimately a fairy tale marriage to a European prince. And the press responded by hunting her with particular viciousness. The contradiction was stunning. Kelly was simultaneously celebrated as the ideal woman and subjected to press scrutiny that revealed how thoroughly that ideal was weaponized against her. Before her marriage to Prince Rainier III of Monaco in 1956, press photographers and reporters had constructed a comprehensive private file on Kelly's romantic history that would have been career-ending for a male actor. Her relationships with co-stars including Clark Gable, William Holden, Bing Crosby, and Ray Milland were documented and discussed in terms that placed all responsibility and all moral weight on Kelly alone, never on the married men involved. The press coverage of her transition from actress to princess was superficially celebratory, but contained a persistent undercurrent of resentment. Photographs taken of Kelly in Monaco over the following years frequently focused on capturing evidence of unhappiness, a distant expression, a moment of fatigue, a private conversation caught at an unflattering angle, all assembled into a narrative that her fairy tale marriage was secretly miserable. Kelly was effectively photographed out of her own autonomy. She had traded one set of controlling institutional forces, the Hollywood studio system, for another in Monaco's royal court, and the press documented this transition not with sympathy, but with the satisfaction of a story that confirmed their predetermined conclusions about the cost of a woman's ambition. 10. Ingrid Bergman, the exile the press created. Ingrid Bergman's story is arguably the most extreme documented case of press-driven destruction of a woman's career and reputation in Hollywood history. Bergman arrived in America from Sweden in the early 1940s and was immediately positioned by the press and her studio as the embodiment of pure, noble femininity, a deliberate contrast to the more openly sensual image of actresses like Turner and Gardner. This constructed purity became the weapon used against her. In 1949, Bergman became romantically involved with Italian director Roberto Rossellini, while both were married to other people. She became pregnant. The American press responded with an intensity of moral condemnation that is genuinely staggering to review in historical context. A United States Senator, Edwin C. Johnson of Colorado, condemned Bergman on the floor of the Senate, calling her a powerful influence for evil and arguing that she should be barred from re-entering the United States. Photographs of Bergman in Italy with Rossellini were published worldwide alongside coverage designed to ensure maximum personal and professional devastation. Her films were boycotted. Her name was removed from projects. She was effectively exiled from Hollywood for 7 years through the combined force of press condemnation and industry blacklisting. When Bergman eventually returned to Hollywood and won her second Academy Award for Anastasia in 1957, the press coverage framed her return as a forgiveness narrative, as if she had committed genuine crimes and was now being granted mercy. The framing itself revealed everything about how the press of this era operated as a moral enforcement system specifically targeting women who stepped outside prescribed boundaries. 11. Hedy Lamarr, the genius. They only photographed as an object. Hedy Lamarr presents perhaps the most intellectually fascinating case of press exploitation in Hollywood history, because what the cameras captured and what they completely ignored are equally revealing. Lamarr was an Austrian actress who fled Europe and a controlling first husband to build a Hollywood career, and who simultaneously developed with composer George Antheil a frequency-hopping communication system that became a foundational technology for modern wireless communication. The press was entirely uninterested in her intellect. What they relentlessly pursued instead were photographs of Lamarr that emphasized her physical appearance, frequently described in press coverage with an objectifying intensity that treated her as decoration rather than as a person. Lamarr was photographed constantly in swimsuits, in evening wear, in candid street shots, the implication always being that her value was entirely physical. The press also pursued her romantic and legal difficulties with persistent enthusiasm. Her multiple marriages and divorces were covered in terms that would not have been applied to a male actor in remotely similar terms. When financial difficulties led Lamarr to attempt various business ventures in her later years, press coverage was cruel about her diminished circumstances. Most devastatingly, Lamarr's genuine scientific contribution, her frequency-hopping patent, developed in 1942, was ignored entirely during her lifetime by both the press and the industries that profited from her work. She died in 2000, having never received significant recognition for an invention that underlies Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS technology. The press that had photographed her relentlessly for 40 years never found her mind worth a single serious story. These women navigated a world that wanted their images without their humanity, their glamour without their complexity, and their compliance without their courage. The press of the 1930s through the 1960s operated as a system of control, rewarding women who stayed within prescribed boundaries and punishing those who dared to live authentically, love freely, or challenge the institutional forces that surrounded them. What's most powerful about looking back at these stories now is recognizing that these women, despite being systematically hunted, exposed, and humiliated, created bodies of work that outlasted every columnist who attacked them. The cameras may have tried to define them. History has finally started correcting the record. If this story resonated with you, subscribe and stay with us, because Hollywood's buried history is only just beginning to be told.